And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Thursday. The Bangko Sentral ramps up efforts to achieve financial inclusion. The central bank teams up with a global network to closely supervise cash agents in the country.
Economists and maritime experts warn that the government's decision to halt oil exploration activities in the West Philippine Sea may discourage investments.
A study by the Energy Department and World Bank says the Philippines has the potential to install up to 21 gigawatts of offshore wind power by the year 2040. And this accounts for more than a fifth of the country's electricity supply.
And airfares are not expected to increase next month as the Civil Aeronautics Board conducts a review on fuel surcharges. We begin our broadcast with the Bangko Sentral partnering with a global network of policymakers in order to closely monitor and supervise cash agents.
Now, the move is in line with the central bank's efforts to achieve financial inclusion as well as payments digitalization. The BSP has teamed up with the Alliance for Financial Inclusion to launch the Agent Registry for Cash Agents, according to the Philippine Star. Now, this regulatory technology tool will facilitate standardized and timely collection of agent data and will create a public database that will help customers locate the nearest accredited agents and their financial services. Cash agents are retail outlets such as supermarkets, convenience stores, pawn shops, pharmacies, and even sari-sari stores that provide basic banking services such as cash deposits, withdrawals, balance inquiry, bills payment, and fund transfers. Data from the BSP show that there were more than 58,000 active cash agents as of end 2020. Now, this covers 85% of areas reached by banking services. Under the BSP's Digital Payments Transformation Roadmap, the central bank aims to convert 50% of total retail transactions to electronic channels and hike the number of Filipino adults with bank accounts to 70% by 2023. Last year, the share of digital payments to retail transactions stood at 30%, while 53% of Filipino adults now have bank accounts.
Now, the central bank expects remittances from OFWs to continue supporting economic recovery from the pandemic. The Bangko Sentral projects cash remittances to grow 4% this year, following the 5.1% rise to a record $31.4 billion last year. In a discussion paper, the BSP said remittances will continue to be a significant force in the country's economy over the medium term. The study cited the increased global demand for overseas workers, particularly medical workers, this year as more economies reopen.
A maritime expert warns that the government's decision to halt oil exploration activities in the South China Sea would push firms to rethink their investments in the area. J. Batong Bakal issued the warning after PXP Energy was directed to put on hold its exploration activities in the West Philippine Sea. Batong Bakal said that the Philippine government's flip-flopping on the oil exploration project is a sign that it is highly favoring China's demands. Meanwhile, a joint study by the World Bank and the Energy Department sees the Philippines' potential to install 21 gigawatts of wind turbine capacity in the next 2 decades. If this is achieved, offshore wind power could meet about a fifth of the country's electricity demand by 2040. It could also create as many as 205,000 jobs and add about 14 billion pesos to the economy. All eyes are on energy stocks, with oil exploration in the West Philippine Sea still in limbo, but a lot of potential in wind. Which ones are feeling the love there, Dan?
Hi, Jess, and good morning. Well, I have to say there's been quite a shift just in the few 2 minutes of trade. We had opened in the green, and right now we are shifting towards red. So, what you see here may be as a result of that. But let's kick off the markets report with those renewable energy stocks. So I have with me here FGen, ACEN, and SPNEC. That's, of course, Solar Philippines and Nueva Ecija. And you do see them trading mostly in the red for SPNEC, down by 1 1/10%. ACEN up by 0.5%. These are, of course, the early players in the renewable energy space. A lot of eyes on those sectors, especially, Jess, and I'm going to pull out for you here, as the oil story continues to be moving upwards of $100 per barrel here, now trading at $102.77, Jess. So again, a lot of eyes on whether this will be the new growth story here, especially in the Philippines when it comes to wind power offshore.
Well, speaking of growth story here on the upside, and we finally have a growth forecast upgrade, which analysts say caused yesterday's rally. Is that spilling over in this morning's trade?
You know, I wanted to say yes earlier on. This was all in the green, and we had opened, firmly above 7,100 there. We are now slipping back by 0.3%. Properties specifically dragging down the bourse, and we need to see what has caused this, sharp swings from gains into losses. The property sector down by 0.8%. And like exactly what you said, yesterday we had quite some optimism with the IMF revision. But apart from that, we also had the sustained BBB plus credit rating from RNI. And then we do have our chief of finance on the show in Bloomberg over in the U.S. this morning, saying that we need to grow 6% annually for the next 5 years before, of course, we get back out of that debt. And we'll be, showing more of that information later on. Just to show our viewers here which ones are still in the green and keeping the faith there. We've got Emperador up by 2.8%. A lot of eyes on that, whether that Singapore listing will be going through. But we also have a couple of telco players here, Converge and Globe Telecom. But on the downside, we've got Mondenisin down by 1.8%, and a mishmash of different stocks here being sold off this morning, Jess. Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez says the domestic economy must grow by more than 6% annually in the next 3 to 5 years to get out of the debt bloated by COVID-19. Dominguez discusses this in an exclusive interview with Bloomberg's Kathleen Hayes. Let's listen in.
The biggest challenge for the next administration is really to grow out of the debt that we incurred during the pandemic, which was natural because our revenues went down due to the lockdowns, and we had increased expenditures. So we had to borrow more money. So the next administration will have to design policies and stick to very strict fiscal discipline to grow out of this debt problem. However, everything is in place in the Philippines to achieve that. Last year, we achieved the growth of 5.7%. In fact, the last quarter was over 7.5% growth rate. So we were well on our way to recovery, except now we have this Ukraine crisis, and that's going to weigh a bit heavily on us. Although we're not combatants, we're affected by the increase in prices of fuel, of grain, and this is among the things we discussed today at the World Bank and the G20 meetings. Yes.
In terms of paying back the debt,
Yes.
Again, you're on the right track.
Yes.
You're moving in the right direction. You have the right intention. About how long? Do you have any sense of how long it's going to take to pay this pandemic-driven debt back?
Well, actually, some of our debt has a 40-year term. So we assumed debt at very, very favorable terms in terms of tenor as well as interest rates. So we're not worried about the repayment. We have to really grow out of the debt. In other words, expand our economy by better than 6% per year over the next 5 or 6 years.
Is it reasonable to assume that any serious consideration of raising the key rate again for the rest of this year is off the table at this point?
We will have to watch exactly what other countries do, particularly the U.S. We don't want to be behind the 8 ball here because, if U.S. raises their interest rates, people in the Philippines will, of course, want to follow those rates. So we have to make sure that we balance our needs, the need to grow, the need to fight inflation, and the need to preserve our capital.
PEZA is urging the government to lift the moratorium freezing establishment of new economic zones in Metro Manila. PEZA says lifting this ban will better align policy with the provisions of the tax reform program. Deputy Director General Tereso Panga explains that the CREATE Act makes no distinction between economic zones established in NCR or elsewhere. Panga says this measure should take precedence as it is a more recent law. He adds that they are also seeing an increase in uptake for ecozones in the capital of around 450,000 to 650,000 seats. The Fiscal Incentives Review Board has earlier rejected a PEZA request to lift the memorandum, saying it is a component of government strategy for developing the countryside.
Now, the slow rollout of booster shots is endangering the country's economic recovery. That's according to Presidential Advisor for Entrepreneurship, Joey Concepcion. This as the immunity provided by the first doses are expected to wane in the second semester. Now, during the Laging Handa briefing, Concepcion explained that the low booster rate is particularly threatening the recovery of MSMEs. That's because the prospect of further lockdowns should cases surge would wipe out whatever momentum they have built up. As of now, the Philippines is still short of its target to vaccinate 90 million Filipinos. This as only 67 million have been fully vaccinated.
Coming right up after the break. Is the country's digital infrastructure strong enough to meet the demands of hybrid work? We'll talk to an expert in the field when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
How do I address?
So sir, dun po yung camera.
Kami rin naninibago this after 2 years.
Kasi lahat sanay tayo sa camera lang harap natin, you know?
Right, exactly.
Sir, gusto niyo po dalhin ko yung water niyo dito.
I'll get it. Okay, thank you.
you're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
Okay, well, there's still so much uncertainty on whether or not we are at the tail end of the pandemic. Businesses have been forced to adapt to a remote work setup, even up to now, when cases have already declined in the country. Question is a hybrid mode of work here to stay?
Well, let's get some insights from Erwin Ko. He's the president and CEO of Gerlavi Corporation. Hello, Erwin, and welcome. You are our first live guest here in studio since
After a
the
long
pandemic,
while.
and we're very, very happy to be with you today.
Okay, so let's take things off with a number of developments here when it comes to hybrid mode of work. I mean, for the BPO sector, primarily, you have the PEZA finally approving at least 30% of the workforce to be allowed to work from home. At the same time, yesterday, we had Colliers Philippines saying that remote work more or less is here to stay. Question is, how viable of an option really is a hybrid mode of work, and is the country ready to embrace that setup?
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. So I think when the pandemic first hit us back in March 2020, everybody was so excited to stay and work at home, and we were having more time for our families and doing things that we liked, activities. But eventually, when we spent more time at home, we realized that a lot of our employees had to, had these mental stress and mental health issues, and eventually they have to go back to work. So with that, I think the Philippines is ready. We're all ready to go back to work. We're all excited, and it's about time that we all see each other face to face like this.
Well, we love this, but some are saying that their productivity has improved with the work from home setup. Do you agree with that? Have you looked at some studies which compare the productivity of people? There are so many things coming out here that the ideal is 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. What's the deal here? What is the real deal when it comes to productivity? What you recommend to companies to implement?
I think it's all about the technology that companies embrace. When you have people working from home, companies had to embrace collaboration technologies. We had to do a lot of Zoom meetings, and we have to do a lot of Microsoft Teams meetings. But eventually, you still have to have that human interaction, and so it's about the technology that they use and provide as tools for their employees.
Okay. Well, another thing that we wanted to talk about is the digital infrastructure. Gerlavi is, of course, a tech company, and this is what you're pushing for, that, we have the infrastructure, we have the technology, if we can invest in it. But given the infrastructure of the Philippines, we saw an acceleration of connectivity during the pandemic. How big of a jump has there been in the past couple of years?
So before the pandemic, we all, were not sure whether the infrastructure, internet would be stable. But over the past 2 years, a lot of us have been working from home. And I think we realized that connectivity is pretty stable. We've never been fully disconnected. Sometimes our internet would flicker or wouldn't be so stable. But then we have other means of connecting. And so with today's technology, we are able to connect a lot of the employees who are working from home to the tools that they used to enjoy when they were in the office.
But was that also the case across the board? I mean, across the country here? Primarily, you'd expect that at least from Metro Manila, but was that also the same scenario for the rural areas particularly? Of course, you have a number of areas in Visayas and Mindanao, and even, of course, in Northern Luzon.
Correct. So I think with the telcos today, they're doing their best to connect everybody. And the percentage of those people who are connected are increasing day by day. And if you're not connected to a fiber or a DSL connection, you still have other means of being connected to the internet.
Now, earlier, Dan was saying, of course, Gerlavi primarily is in the business of telco distribution here. But since the pandemic, you came up with a cloud-based platform solution here for companies. How exactly does this program help with business continuity, and what pain points were you trying to address?
Thank you. So when we saw companies starting to send their employees back home, we realized that a lot of them won't be able to address their landline calls. So landline is still integral to today's business operations. You would be receiving landline calls for sales inquiries or even technical concerns or questions like that. So if that is the case, then how do you address or forward all these calls to employees who are working from home? So our product, Televi Cloud, actually is a unified communication platform. We provide voice, communication, call center, and video conferencing services. So as a service, it means that our customers don't have to worry about the infrastructure or hardware they need to set up. We take care of all of that for them. For provisioning to onboarding customers, we'll take care of all of that. And they get to enjoy all the features and connecting all their employees even though they are working from home. So if you imagine now, if there's an incoming call to the company and they want to reach an employee but they happen to be working from home, so then we can easily transfer that call to a mobile app, an IP phone, or even a web browser to that employee who's working from home.
Okay, who are your key target markets here? Are these big companies? Is this more B2B, those that have money to invest in these kinds of new infrastructure, especially migrating to the cloud? It's not necessarily cheap. Or are you targeting MSMEs? And how exactly are you doing that?
So our product is quite flexible, and we've created packages that are suitable for different market segments. So if we're talking about the micro SMEs, small, medium companies, we have product and packages that are fit for them. We also have packages which are targeting the banks or government sector. So even for the larger enterprises or conglomerates, we have services which would be suitable to address their needs.
Now, 2 years into the pandemic, how has the product take-up been for your cloud-based solution here, particularly with small businesses, since they are the ones heavily battered by the crisis, at the same time, even the public sector?
So, well, admittedly, I think the Philippines has gone through a transition from being primarily on-premise before. We were heavily investing in on-premise systems. Now that the companies are considering cloud-based solutions, the offtake has been quite interesting and quite fast. The last few months, a lot of micro SMEs, actually we have a lot of government and hospitals, BPOs, remittance companies, and these are all companies that have employees who are, they give the option of working remotely or working in the office.
Okay, how does that happen exactly? Now that people, like you mentioned, you're encouraging people still to come back to the office on premise. How does this setup work when you have cloud and you're trying to work remotely, and then you also want to go to the office? Does that just link each other up? Are the systems, the traditional on-premise systems, completely not usable anymore because you're migrated to the cloud, or is there a period of transition?
So our product or service is also very flexible, where we are able to integrate with legacy or old systems out in the market. So if you have an existing infrastructure or equipment that you've invested in before, we can actually connect the cloud system to your old system. For those who are working from home and they suddenly transition to working in the office, they are still able to access their connectivity or their accounts even though they are now in the office.
All right, definitely great things in line here, of course, for Gurlavi. I mean, a lot of solutions here that I believe a number of companies would definitely be benefiting from. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Again, Erwin Ko, President and CEO of Gurlavi Corporation. Now, here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Some passengers were stranded at terminals after a few bus operators have started implementing a new window hour policy. But the LTFRB clarifies they have yet to pass a resolution on the matter. Shaila Francisco with the details.
Senior citizen Conrado was here as early as 8:30 a.m. to go home to Baguio. But he will have to wait for 14 hours to leave Metro Manila as the first bus trip will begin at 10 p.m.
Paghintayin ka dito, senior citizen pa. Ano gagawin namin? Matutuwa kami.
Other commuters are also complaining as some of them waited since 4 in the morning.
Gutom po ma'am eh. Medyo
Pinakakalam na nga si Mura dahil kulang sa budget. Galing pa akong Bicol. Abol ako sa kasal ng anak ko bukas, Sambales.
Others decided to hire vans. It will cost them 800 to 1,300 pesos per head compared to the 300 peso fare for buses. Some bus companies in EDSA explained that all trips in Metro Manila terminals will happen between 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. starting today. But a transport group warns this is a risk for commuters and drivers.
Lalong-lalo na doon sa mga mananakay na ibababa natin alanganing oras. Saan sila sasakay ng madaling araw?
However, the LTFRB clarified that no resolution has been made on window hours. They only advise provincial buses to stop at the Integrated Terminal Exchange or common terminals for their final destination. This as they note that some terminals in NCR have not passed health and security inspections.
Hindi natin sinasabi kailanman na alas 10 lang ng gabi hanggang alas 5 ng umaga sila pwedeng bumiyahe. Ayaw lang talaga sumunod ng mga provincial buses sa norte na doon sa ITX sila mag-terminal.
But stopping at these common terminals could mean added costs and more hassle for commuters, especially if they have to transfer between buses with big luggages. Amid the confusion, some buses still continue their trip beyond window hours. Shaila Francisco, VR1 News.
Meanwhile, the Civil Aeronautics Board says airfares are not expected to increase further next month. This as the agency continues to review its guidelines for imposing passenger fuel surcharges. This means the Level 4 passenger fuel surcharge imposed in March and April will remain in effect next month. Under Level 4, fuel surcharge rates per passenger range from 108 to over 400 pesos for domestic flights and from 543 to over 5,000 pesos for international flights originating from the Philippines. The CAB raised the fuel surcharge for domestic and international flights to Level 4 in March and April from Level 3 in the first 2 months due to increase in fuel jet prices.
Now, the country's net oil imports rebounded last year, nearly doubling the 2020 bill. The net import bill, or the difference between oil imports and exports, amounted to over $11 billion last year. That's almost an 88% increase from a year ago. The country's oil imports have now reached pre-pandemic levels on fuel demand recovery and high crude prices.
And that's a first look into the business day this Thursday, April 21, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.